Riley's eyes fluttered open to the harsh reality of another sleepless night. At just 15, they carried the weight of the world on their shoulders. A world that had been turned upside down since their mother was rushed to the hospital with a severe intestinal blockage a week ago. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was the bone-deep weariness that comes from watching your parents suffer while battling your own demons in silence. The teenager had barely slept in days, their mind racing with worry every time they closed their eyes. Images of their mother hooked up to beeping machines haunted their dreams, while their eating disorder, a vicious companion that had been quiet for weeks, began whispering its familiar, destructive mantras. Riley's anxiety, already severe on good days, had reached suffocating levels, making even the simple act of eating feel impossible. When Riley's grandmother gently asked if she could pick them up later to visit their hospitalized mother, the exhausted teen mumbled, "Okay," and desperately tried to steal just one more hour of precious sleep. But peace was shattered moments later by their phone buzzing with a message that felt like a slap across the face. Their mother's text was cold, cutting. "Don't visit me. You're being selfish making Grandma make 2 trips just so you can come." Riley's heart shattered as they read those words. Selfish? This child who had visited every single day since the hospitalization began, who had sacrificed their entire winter break to be at their mother's bedside, who had brought comfort items and attended to every need. Suddenly, they were selfish for wanting 1 extra hour of sleep? With trembling fingers, Riley called their mother, voice breaking as they tried to explain the sleepless nights filled with worry, the constant fear of losing the most important person in their world. But instead of compassion, they received a lecture about perspective. "I'm barely sleeping too with all these machines," their mother said, her voice sharp with pain and medication-induced irritability. The words hit Riley like physical blows, as if their suffering didn't matter, as if their mental health crisis was insignificant compared to physical illness. Then came their father's voice on the phone, delivering the cruelest blow of all. "You have no reason to be like this. You're so comfortable at home." The dismissal was complete, devastating. Riley's eating disorder, spiraling anxiety, and sleepless nights were reduced to teenage dramatics by the very people who should have recognized their child was drowning. "Focus more on your mother. She's the sick one," they were told, as if Riley's mental health collapse was a choice, a selfish indulgence rather than a genuine medical crisis triggered by watching their parents suffer. The message was clear. Their eating disorder relapse, their anxiety attacks, their inability to function. None of it mattered because they weren't the one in the hospital bed. Riley hung up the phone feeling smaller than they ever had in their 15 years of life. Here was a child who had been the perfect caregiver, visiting daily, bringing supplies, offering comfort despite their own deteriorating mental state. Yet the moment they needed understanding, the moment they showed human vulnerability by oversleeping after days of insomnia, they were branded selfish. The eating disorder that had been lurking in the shadows seized this moment of emotional devastation. The restrictive thoughts that Riley had fought so hard to quiet roared back to life, fed by shame and self-blame. If they were selfish for having needs, then perhaps they deserved nothing. Not food, not rest, not compassion. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Riley. They were being called selfish for experiencing the exact mental health crisis that naturally occurs when a teenager watches their parent face a life-threatening condition. Their body was responding to trauma with textbook symptoms, insomnia, anxiety, eating disorder relapse. Yet they were being punished for not being strong enough to hide their suffering. In their edit, Riley's internalized the gaslighting completely, calling themselves a poor excuse of a child and apologizing for having human limitations. This 15-year-old was convinced their mental health struggles were moral failures, that their need for sleep after days of worry was a betrayal of their sick mother. The most heartbreaking part wasn't the intestinal blockage that had hospitalized their mother. It was watching a child torture themselves for having normal psychological responses to trauma. Riley's parents, consumed by their own crisis, had failed to see their teenager's silent suffering, instead choosing to weaponize guilt against a child who was already drowning in self-blame. This wasn't a story about a selfish teenager. It was about a family in crisis where the most vulnerable member was being blamed for struggling to cope. Riley's anxiety and eating disorder weren't choices they were making. They were symptoms of a child overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control, desperately needing support instead of criticism. Have you ever been called selfish for struggling with your mental health during a family crisis? How do we support teenagers who are caregivers while battling their own demons? Share your thoughts on the impossible expectations placed on young people during medical emergencies.